Good evening, everyone who's joined us this so far. Thank you for coming. Before we begin, a few Zoom-related notes. Tonight's program has live closed captioning that you can enable or disable by selecting the closed caption button labeled CC on your screen. Because this is auto-generated, there may be inaccuracies within the transcript. There usually are. But don't worry, we're recording this program and we'll be correcting the captions before the video is posted online. I want to thank Menon, our IT specialist, and the entire Rose staff, especially Elizabeth and Caitlin, who have helped us launch this program. So welcome, everyone. My name is Ganita Nkori. I am the Henry and Lois Foster Director and Chief Curator of the Rose Art Museum and the curator of the exhibition we are celebrating this evening, titled My Mechanical Sketchbook, Barclay L. Hendricks and Photography. I had the distinct pleasure of working on this show with my wonderful colleague, Dr. Eliane Hill, the Rose's guest curator for African and African diaspora art. This evening is very special. Eliane and I will be hosting a conversation with the artist, educator, curator, Ari Montford, who was a very close friend of Barclay Hendricks for 4 decades. But before we begin this conversation, Eliane and I will provide a brief overview of the show to introduce Hendricks, a virtuoso painter, a brilliant photographer, a fashion icon, a collector of hats and shoes, as you will see, a lover of basketball, music, and poetry. Miles Davis and Langston Hughes were among his favorites. And I want to just let you know that a lengthy, in-depth virtual tour is scheduled on March 2nd, also at 7 p.m. So please join Eliane and myself for that. But to set the mood for this virtual opening, I worked with Rose student intern Vicente Caduela to prepare a couple of 2-minute clips that we will be sharing throughout this program. Thanks also to Marissa Small for her help, and also a curatorial intern at the Rose. And a shout out to all our fine arts students and faculty who are having a watch party to celebrate with us. So hi all, thank you so much. So without further ado, I will share with you what Vicente prepared. I hand it over to Eliane.
Born in Philadelphia on April 16th, 1945, Barclay L. Hendricks has become internationally renowned as a virtuoso portrait painter. His monumental portraits of himself and others painted on linen, in oil and acrylic seem to leap off flat canvases, imprinting indelible impressions of their subjects' distinct personalities, flamboyant self-fashioning, and performative pizzazz. After the artist's death on April 18th, 2017, a treasure trove of never before seen works on paper, photographs, Polaroids, and film negatives were uncovered in the artist's New London, Connecticut home and studio. A selection from these new materials is the focus of the Rose Art Museum's exhibition, My Mechanical Sketchbook, Barclay L. Hendricks and Photography. The fact that Hendricks had always been an avid photographer is well known. This exhibition presents Hendricks's photography as autonomous artworks, as models for painting, and as images produced by his mechanical sketchbook, the artist's own term for his camera. The camera that helped Hendricks capture the sights and insights he gleaned from immersing himself within the world.
So, by displaying Hendricks's riveting photographs, Polaroids, and drawings, alongside and in dialogue with some of the artist's well-known oil and acrylic paintings, we hope to shed light on complex and fascinating aspects of the artist's creative process, artistic versatility, and brilliant, all-encompassing vision. So, we organized the exhibition in 5 overlapping sections. The first, The Eye and the Lens, Reflections of Self, relates to several things. First of all, in 1966, Barclay Hendricks was awarded a traveling scholarship from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. His travels took him to the major museums and art sites in Europe, where he was strongly impacted by the portrait paintings he saw. He was also struck, however, by the lack of representation of Black subjects. This absence, this refusal to represent, is reminiscent of Ralph Ellison's 1952 analysis of Black invisibility in U.S. society in his book, The Invisible Man. So Hendricks's paintings and photographs address Black invisibility by producing a vibrant and varied pantheon of monumental Black subjects endowed with remarkable dignity, beauty, and style. A visual mode of self-empowerment, Hendricks's paintings and photographs unequivocally assert that Black is beautiful. In these portraits, like this one for example, he deliberately cites and reconfigures painters he admired like Velázquez and Van Eyck, Parmigianino. So some of these works, like these, are independent artworks, autonomous. Some are models. This photograph is a model for a painting that is based on Bobby Seale's statement that Superman never saved any Black folks. Here we see that the photograph and the painting kind of, for us curators, they helped us understand so much about his practice and the relationship between his art, which you see here, see the reflection of the windows in his glasses, see the musical instrument here. So the photography is really a key that had been missing when we were there. Eliane?
Among the portraits are dozens of mesmerizing self-portraits These don't merely counter the invisibility of Black subjects, they also challenge the hypervisibility of Black people in the public imagination, ever heightened by white supremacy, state surveillance, and policing. And they confront the intertwined fear and hypersexualization of Black bodies. We gave another section the title My People, because throughout his life, Barkley Hendricks engaged with what he called global look-seeing. Both at home and abroad, he photographed people whom he found visually compelling, interesting, and special. His Polaroids, photographs, and paintings lovingly recorded the people who were part of his life, many of whom belonged to overlooked communities from Africa and the African diaspora, or I would even say Africa's diasporas. Hendricks had an astute talent for capturing the ways people chose to fashion and present themselves to a world that often denied their humanity. The photographs convey the confidence, defiance, pride, beauty, and joy of people taking pleasure in being seen and desired. With a focus on his subjects' distinct sartorial flair and unique attitude, Hendricks emphasized personhood and individuality, highlighting Blackness as a beautiful spectrum rather than a monolith. In another section that we titled Fashion and Desire, we explore how Hendricks's work dismantles gendered conventions of fashion and style, expanding notions of masculinity and femininity and desire. Attentive to the sartorial choices of his subjects, as well as his own, Hendricks presents unbridled freedom and desire. In 1976, he said, quote, "My work provides me with total freedom. In turn, it demands total honesty. So long as one can remain honest with himself and his work, he'll have the freedom for the exploration and satisfaction of his foremost feelings and desires," end quote.
So the next section we titled Boombox and Television. Hendricks was absolutely passionate about music. He said that he's a, quote, staunch, dyed-in-the-wool jazz fan. He obsessively photographed musicians whenever he could, and he recalled one of the most poignant experiences that he had was when he photographed Miles Davis and interacted with him. Endowed with a heightened desire to see and hear, Hendricks was also very much aware of the mechanical tools that could amplify the senses, as well as record and retrieve audiovisual information. Just as the camera lens enhanced his capacity to see and remember visual data, the television set and the boombox delivered sights and sounds. Of course, at Brandeis, we love this specific photograph. He was very interested in how Black folks were represented on television as well. And here, a year after the Clarence Thomas hearings, he portrays the one and only Anita Hill, who spoke truth to power and is the epitome of dignity. We're lucky to have Anita Hill, Professor Hill, as a university professor, colleague, and mentor at Brandeis and on the Rose Board of Advisors. So other works on paper also show this. He also drew inspiration from Harlem Renaissance poet Langston Hughes, as I mentioned earlier, who experimented with a literary form called jazz poetry. And there are series of things that, of works that are titled Langston Hughes. Generally, the number of photographs, Polaroids, drawings that deal with music and visual technologies attest to their importance in Hendricks's world. So in our curatorial journey, we followed Hendricks's lead and we placed quotations from the poetry of Langston Hughes throughout the gallery. A powerful section is titled I Too Sing America. And before we move on, again, I worked with Vicente to listen to Langston Hughes recite his own poem.
For a whole race of people freed from slavery with nothing, without money, without work, without education, it has not always been easy to hold fast to dreams. But the Negro people believed in the American dream. Now, since almost 100 years of freedom, we've come a long ways. But there is still a long way to go for the Negro and democracy. This is a poem called I Too. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful we are and be ashamed. I too am America.
Barclay Hendricks persistently refused to be confined by narrow definitions or categories. As a Black figurative painter who often portrayed members of Black communities, he resisted being dismissively labeled as a political artist.
Art making in and of itself may be viewed as an act of resistance. And Black representation and self-representation that strive to combat racist stereotypes or the invisibilizing of Black folks and elevating notions of Black agency and power may also be seen as a form of activism. And yet, Hendricks did not like to be reduced to one thing. He defied categorization. So he insisted that he painted the world around him as he saw and experienced it. Alongside the beauty, performative flair, and fashionable bravado, he also saw and knew that racism, violence, and injustice prevailed in the United States. Eliane?
We suggest that ignoring such realities is a political act of acquiescence. Hendrix's art, which insists on exposing and giving voice to these difficult truths, may be construed as an existential act of survival and resistance. Ganit will now introduce our guest, James Ari Montford.
Ari, will you turn on your video and show us your beautiful face? So,
okay, I think I'm here, yes.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. And we're looking at these wonderful photographs of you and Hendricks. You look really, really very, very young here. Here you look more like during the last few years, and this attests to 40 years of friendship. So let me just formally say that it is our absolute pleasure to introduce Ari Montford, an artist, educator, curator, whose path was launched at Brandeis University's Fine Arts Department. Ari graduated in 1974 with honors, and to the best of our knowledge, he is the first studio art major who is African American and Native American. And I say this because this is also a very, very important part of his art making practice and your identity, Ari. As a student at Brandeis in 1972, Ari met Barclay Hendricks, who then started a 30-year tenure at Connecticut College as a professor of art. We'll hear about this shortly from Ari. After graduating from Brandeis, Ari went on to get an MA from Columbia University and an MFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art, as well as a lot of other studying, a lot of other prizes, awards, and research, I would say, scholarship, art making. We are absolutely thrilled that Ari's work is currently on view at the Rose Art Museum as part of our 60th anniversary exhibition, Recollections, 6 Decades at the Rose Art Museum. Ari is very proud that it hangs not far away from his teacher, Grace Hardigan's painting. The Rose is very honored to have 4 works by Ari in our permanent collection, and to embrace Ari as an integral part of the Rose family. Thank you for being here, Ari, and I will go to Eliane for the first question.
Ari,
Well,
thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. As you know, I'm totally honored by this entire experience with you, and I'm going to try to live up to everything that can be sort of identified going forward. So before you get to the first question, I just wanted to indicate that Langston Hughes is one of my life heroes, and I was introduced to his work at Brandeis by Arlene Cliff, who was my English instructor at that time, and was quite an awakening for me, a woke moment in that sense. And there's one poem I wanted to just sort of, it's a short piece, and it's called Merry-Go-Round. And it's done in the voice of a little child. And the child says, a little girl, and this is a short poem, and I'm going to just kind of basically paraphrase because I wasn't intending to represent it, but very quickly, it's Mister, I'm from the North. I'm from the North. I'm here in Mississippi, and I find that I don't have a place to sit on a merry-go-round. Up north, I can sit where I want to sit. Down here, where does a girl from the North sit on a merry-go-round? So that's a piece.
Wow. That's a beautiful connection. I just really wanted to ask you to start off about your friendship with Barclay Hendricks. I know that you two were like brothers to each other. And so I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit more about how you met and about your friendship.
We met at a party back in 1972, and I was visiting home in New London, Connecticut from Brandeis, actually, and we happened to hook up at a party that was off campus, and we had a rousing time, and we started chatting with one another, talking with one another there, and of course, I was just at that point just scratching the surface with this whole art thing in my life, and Barclay was there. He was doing it, and it was just an amazing. So I was meeting this incredible artist, sort of who was out of the blocks and running, and I was like standing there going, "My God, look at that!" And so he was essentially initially I would have to say a role model, you know. And at Brandeis, I had these incredible experiences, but there was no Barclay at Brandeis at that time. And here he is now. My God! So it's like an incredible sort of full circle in that regard. So we started chatting, and when I went down to New London various times during the academic year, I would stop in his office. I would see him, and we would hang out. And at that point, I hadn't really been to his studio, and it was something that I come to learn later that very few folks have ever been to his studio, wherever it might have been located. So it was at first it was just sort of a friendship that was quite just like any friendship you'd have with someone, except that for me it was the opportunity to connect with someone that was this artist, and I was still in my infancy around all of these issues about, can I be an artist? You know, that's a what does that mean? And it certainly was not in my lexicon in terms of my understanding of making. You know, so I think it's essentially it. There was this very beginning that was just natural in that sense. Um,
Well, I know that from our conversations that as you developed as an artist yourself, you became more than a mentor and a student, a professor and an art student. You became really friends and like brothers in some way. There was a way you called each other by some name, right?
yes, we eventually we realized that through some experiences that we had that were very personal, we decided to call ourselves brothers from another mother. So it became a real sort of, we would look at one another and we would say it up, there's a brother from another mother experience. And so it just became something that was very mutual and it was very respectful. And we were able to sort of, at some point we started talking without talking. So we would be in spaces together, and it would just be sort of a generous sort of connection. We started having eventually what we call kitchen meetings. So we would sit in his kitchen and we would have these discussions that were relative to the art community, to what we're doing in studio, and just this whole process, which led us to experiences together over time.
I love this photograph, which the Rose acquired. And I think about you in your studio and Hendrix in his studio here, you know, showing himself as an artist with brushes and the tools of his trade, also a photographer. You know, the camera's almost like a third eye. And then in the background, his records, the books, and of course Langston Hughes and poetry were important. And I think that that was the kind of ambiance and that was the kind of camaraderie you shared, not just the art, but also intellectual and cultural aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly when we were in spaces together in his studio, um, that was the case. And we were challenging one another to address some of those larger issues around white supremacy all the time, you know, and it was at some point it became sort of this unspoken sort of conversation we would have about particular issues that were going on in the world necessarily. And so his environment was safe for both of us to share it. And I think we reached a point where I didn't feel anyways that I was a threat to him in any particular way with respect to his making, you know, that I was not going to run off and try to replicate any of his imagery or in that sense. So there's like I felt a comfort level that existed there. And certainly I was and sort of connecting with Barclay before he married Susan, and then after that experience, I still was welcome there in a very sort of genuine way in terms of that our relationship expanded to another level after that experience.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I wonder if we can move on to, there are a few artworks that, especially the ones with the high heel shoes, fashion, this one, another one that we actually included some of our conversations with you in the labels because you had a kind of insider view of his thinking about fashion and desire. This is a recent gift to the Rose Art Museum. Would you like to talk about it, Ari?
Yes, this can be a piece which has many layers to it, and or not, depending on how you sort of engage with it. It's at once seductive and once one also very fearful in terms of the imagery that we are sort of confronted with. And there's some discourse about what those nipple-like structures that are on the tip of the, are they chest pieces, or are they actually nipples? So you're kind of going back and forth with respect to your interpretation of them. And then of course the reference to the melon there is puts us all into sort of my experience of wondering how I deal with that in my life, and in terms of the representation of that melon. And I mean, do I consume it? Do I eat it? And the figure there that we're looking at, is that male? Is it animal? Is it what's going on? And there's a whole representation about that tongue out of the mouth. And there's an artist, Steve Locke, that you may all be aware of, who does incredible things with mouth and tongues in terms of the work. So it fits within a certain description of how one can engage in animating a piece, and also in the messaging that is there. There are the chains which are relative there in the piece, and so it's really quite loaded in terms of that present. And that those black legs, are they really black legs, or are they some sort of hairy truncated something or other? So there's all these narratives that you can sort of play off of. And the plant there, the flowering plant, is, oh my God, that's you think of any kind of a sexual sort of reference that might be going there with that too. So it's sort of loaded in that sense. I think that it's a piece that also is very beautiful, and that sense of that yellow that's there, is very inviting, and it's a wonderful sort of. He's a great colorist in terms of his representation of how the use of color, just that sense. So
Right. And Elian did some writing on the label about the watermelon and how it became a kind of stereotype that references Black folks. So Elian, do you want to share that with us?
Yes, in the research that I did about how watermelons became this sort of racist trope, I found that it's kind of drawn from post-Civil War, post-emancipation US, when a lot of freed Black people were growing watermelons to eat, but also to sell. And so it was the symbol of independence that people then, in kind of the resentments after the Civil War, made into the symbol of laziness, and they're not working, instead they're growing these watermelons and eating these watermelons. And so I thought it was really interesting that Hendrix incorporates that into this image that also is kind of drawing out notions of sexuality and desire and forbidden fruit. And it really indicates or kind of implies this idea that whether it's social liberation, sexual liberation, political liberation by Black people, that so much censure can accompany that. And so there's this idea that, as you said, as you said, Ari, there are so many layers to it, so many ways to read this image as being about, histories of those kind of racist stereotypes, histories of, fear of Black bodies and Black sexuality, but also about liberation and independence and, kind of striking out on your own. So I like that there are so many different elements, and even the pawns, you talk about the pawns and are they nipples? Are they pawns? What does that mean? There's a whole nother level of interpretation possible there.
I think it's important for the viewers and who are here with us tonight to remember the date of this piece, 1987. And I know that it was pivotal for me and for him in terms of an experience that we shared a few years earlier than this. And so I think that this piece is a sort of a breakout piece for him in terms of starting to do work that was, there's been some discussion about his sense of being politically motivated in his imagery, but I think it's more emotionally sort of connected to these issues that you're discussing, Elian. So
Right.
So that date is, I think, really important to see, because if we talk about 1983, which is that, I think we're headed to doing that, then I think you can get a sense of the trajectory,
Right,
the
right.
trajectory of the work. And so, yes, that's, so I know what is happening here from having those kinds of experiences with him, yeah, it comes out of the clan experience, that
Right.
we should.
We'll get there. We'll
Yeah,
get there.
yeah,
1982, a
yes.
pivotal year. So we also talked about this, Ari, and you told me that Barkley had a whole collection of high heel shoes.
I,
And,
rooms filled, they seemed like, and so many there, and there was one room or one area that was just, they were all gold shoes. It was just all gold high heel shoes, and as you can see in this image, that there's that uh, pair that have that red in them, and so I always see him when he uses red, he's talking about blood, and so there's that sort of reference that blood is being spilled, and it's a real sort of entry point there for me in terms of how I see the imagery in that sense.
and here too, we see desire,
Yes.
but just like in the previous one, we had the chains and the watermelon as a racist trope. Here, underneath it says slaves' quarters.
Yes.
And in the label, we related that to a term that you use, Ari, and quoted you as talking about PTSD as a post-traumatic slavery disorder, that in spite of the pizzazz, the fashion, and everything,
Mhm.
if you scratch the surface, there is a history there that neither you nor Barkley ignored. And the color red is definitely something that continues. Even this wonderful image has this reddish hue, wonderful photographs.
Yes.
And you mentioned 1982, and but before we go to the actual image, you sent this to me after the checklist was already finished, and you knew that I was working on this, and you sent me this image, and I talked with Eliana, and we just knew we had to rethink and include
Mhm.
this work. So can you tell us what we see in this
Yeah,
image?
what you're seeing is a day, 2 days when I was with Susan. That's Susan Hendricks, and she engaged me in saying that of all the folks that I want to help me right now, I want you here in my house and in our garages, and just help me establish what we have. And so she went into this particular garage, which was a bit of from the house, actually. It was down in another street, actually. And there were two garage spaces there that were filled with Barkley's art. And she was not aware of necessarily it being cataloged in any particular way. And so we started going through, and we found this piece, and it was just astounding to run across it. And we were just traumatized by it in terms of my remembrance of the experience of being with Barkley when we were shooting at a Klan rally in 1982. And so, uh,
So
yes,
this is the photograph. It's not a very good copy, and this is the way it hangs at the
yes,
Rose. And I know it's hard for you, and I really appreciate you talking about your dear friend who is not with us today, and
yes.
also returning to this traumatic experience
It,
of
it,
going to a Klan rally. But it's really important, that experience.
it was more so than I can even imagine. I can express to you, because we uh, Barkley engaged me in asking, "Do you want to do this? I want to do this. I want to do this with you." I was living in Norwich at the time, and he came up, and we picked me up, and we went up to the site, which was a Mohegan Park in Norwich, Connecticut. And yes, they were there. There were hundreds of people assembled in a ball field, and there were blockades, those police barricades that were sanctioned across the ball field area, the infield area, and there were dugouts there. And as we assembled, we came in, there were some police officers there with some wands that they ran across people, but we found our way in this space with hundreds of people and Barclay and I. And what seemed to protect us from any assault or trauma of any sort, or around physical trauma, was the sense of how we were intending to be photographers. And he actually was a photographer, but and I was his assistant, and we had cameras and equipment, and we just found ourselves right there at the barricades. And sure enough, they came out of the dugouts in all of their regalia, and they had megaphones and came right up to us, directly right up to us, and with their megaphones blaring, this is the problem right here, using the N-word, 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 right here, there they are, these two right here, right here, right here. And so it was like, we stood there, and Barclay was taking images, and this is one of the images that and there were others as well. And we realized that, well, I certainly did, someone could have walked up behind us and put a knife in our backs. You know, it was just this really intense moment that still haunts me in many ways. And I know that for myself, it radically changed my work, and I know that it impacted Barclay as well. And it was a slow burn, so to speak, in terms of how one engages these experiences in life. And it really it took me probably 3-4 years before I was able to sort of begin to do the work that I have been doing, I think, since that period of time. Does that sort of describe it, Ganeet, in terms of?
Yeah, but so,
yes.
well, there are a few details that I would like to, if you are willing to share it with us. You said that you weren't sure you wanted to go, but you wanted to go with your friend.
Yeah.
And that you pretended to be press photographers, not just photographers.
Yes.
This is August 1982. This
Yes.
is Connecticut,
Yes.
and there were hundreds of Klan members and the Grand Wizard and these
Yes.
people in the white regalia. You said that at a certain point you felt threatened and like you put your life in danger, and that the two of you went back to your place, I think.
Yes.
And what happened there? And
We sat in my kitchen, and we just didn't say anything. We just sat there. And it seemed like the longest time, but it was a moment where there were no words for the experience, except that we survived it. I think that's what also led us to this place of being clearly brothers from another mother. It was just this moment that was shared. And the next day, he actually, I think you have in the exhibition, the next day he sent me a postcard and described the experience as being really emotive for him, and a moment that brought us together in a way. And so that postcard is, it creates for me, after having seen the exhibition, you know, it sort of brings it all into another level of reality. It creates this sense of authenticity to the experience. You can clearly see that this really did happen, and and sometimes you look at that as that happened. And my thank you to him was that I took that postcard and made my own piece and sent it back to him, and said thank you on it sometime later. And so so it continues to be something that was a gift, because I only discovered that just months ago, after knowing that he was going to be given this wonderful exhibition that you have arrived at. And I found that piece, and it just is, it's incredible, the sense of that Indian stamp that's there. I mean, all that, it's just a piece that's very haunting in so many ways in terms of it's just has its own life in that regard.
Would you mind reading us? So this is August 12th. This is the day after the two of you went through this really unsettling, traumatic, dangerous experience. And would you read it to us?
James, words still escape me when it comes to what we did yesterday. I'm sure they will always be out of reach for those of us people of the sun, who were there. Always, I will feel a special kinship with you, which will always be there, and words will not come to my aid there either. But we both know what we mean. Love and peace. So I may start crying again, but it's a tough thing to. When I read it again after those many years, just recently, it just
Yeah.
it's really emotive. It's very real, and the exhibit just humanizes this artist in a way which rarely do you see with an exhibition, which it's astounding in that regard.
Just to tell the public that Ari brought this postcard in case we wanted to include it in the show after most of the show was hanging. And shout out to Anna Kovacs who really just took it, framed it, put it, and we immediately put it together. And this is the work that you made as a kind of homage to him.
Yes.
So,
And
yeah.
and it is a piece that I sent to him, and I know that it hangs in the house presently in New London.
Right. And I find it really moving that the postcard he sent is of an image, a self-portrait that he called me. So he's sending you himself in a way.
Yes, yes,
And then you're sending it back to him. So part of your friendship.
yes.
So, Ari, you told Eliane and myself that before Barclay passed in April of 2017, the two of you had a long conversation about art and some of these issues of white supremacy and
Yes,
the
yes,
killing of Black people.
yes. And that time was there was the Whitney Biennial was on, and there was the Dana Schutz discussion around the Emmett Till work and the protests that were going on involved with that. And so actually, there's probably just about the last conversation that I had with Barclay, and it was very helpful, as they always were, the conversations with being topical in terms of the sense of his interpretation, understanding of larger issues in the art community and beyond, and how they all sort of, there was this intersection of how all of this was working around how he would make his work, in terms of that sort of description. And so then the question comes up, would Barclay object to this piece? And so we actually had some conversation about that. And the sense of agency is a word that, and a description of how any artist sort of operates. And certainly Barclay was eminently concerned about his own agency and his making, and any artist that he would be engaged with, he would make that sort of a barometer in terms of how he would interpret the work. And so we talked about this, actually, this incident, this experience, and the question is, did this artist have agency? And so we would come out with this we wound up being on the same page, essentially, which was that she had done previous work that was similar to some degree. This wasn't like a one-off sort of process. It was part of a body of work that she had been pursuing. So that give some credibility to the device that she was representing there. There's also she was a mother, and so there's this whole element that you're thinking about in terms of how she might be referencing her own sort of sensibilities, which aren't they universal in that regard? So it's in line with, I think, a lot of the notions of how Berkeley saw himself as an artist. And I'm certainly not trying to speak for him, but I'm just maybe referencing a conversation that we had that helped me understand the significance of that period of time in that exhibit and what was being said. As it, this all sort of predates a little bit some of the activity in the last couple of years, but you can certainly see that well, I felt that Berkeley was in tune with this notion of the universality of the art and how it can create this larger dialogue, and certainly that piece did that in that respect. So that's sort of what I'm sort of coming away with that experience of. I think it's important that we see that he was still very much interested in how the process of dialogue, and he was a teacher at Connecticut College, and that whole experience I know of being engaged in working with students and his colleagues, and so he read the New York Times quite regularly, because I would see that on the table in my kitchen visits, so that was very real to the experience of being in space. There were books everywhere, and so he was constantly sort of navigating all of that world out there. It's definitely and Susan, his wife, was part of that whole dialogue as well, and in the experience. So
Yeah. Eliane, do you have a follow-up question?
I do not, but I just wanted to thank you, Ari, for sharing all of that with us, that very personal relationship, but also, artists working through their ideas together. And I like the aspect of what Hendrix pushed back against, being a political artist, because I think it shows that he wasn't trying to be political. He was trying to show us the world that we live in and the world as he saw it. And to me, that's very moving and powerful. So I think your stories just reinforce that. So thank you very much. Thank you so much.
thank you.
So, go on, Ari.
I just wanted to indicate that I'm very thankful to be part of this discussion and presentation, and I am hoping that the exhibit continues to garner the attention that it deserves, and it's just it's a wonderfully composed, constructed process. I hope all your visitors who are here tonight can have a chance to see it, no matter where they are in the world.
Right.
It's worth seeing. It's an incredible show, and I was totally moved by the piece. You again, I want to say, you just totally humanized him in a way which often exhibits do not succeed at. Just the installation, the color on the walls is just astounding, how it connects with some of the imagery. It's just so. I mean, all the details that you think of when you go to a show, it's just
Right.
also wonderful done. So thank you everyone. Thank you.
So shout out to our designer, Sienna Scarf, who you should have seen the gallery. It was full of swatches, just finding that right tone that is really echoed in a lot of the Polaroids, that kind of pale blue, and in a lot of the images. So I can just say that the entire exhibition was curated and designed and installed with a lot of love and care. It's a huge honor, and I know I speak for Eliane as well, to put together a show for such a genius, really. And the more we learn about him, the more we're kind of overwhelmed by his vision and his creativity, and how the photography and the works on paper and the Polaroids and the paintings are just absolutely amazing. But, you know, at the Rose, we really like to amplify the voice of the artists. So I worked with Vicente and Marissa, my wonderful student curatorial interns, to bring you to give Barclay Hendricks the last word. So before we go,
my camera I call my mechanical sketchbook. It allows me to get information, and I'm fast, but I'm not as fast as the camera.
so Eliane, please come back. I have one last minute to thank everyone, and I'd like to thank you as well. So now you know where we got the title of the show, My Mechanical Sketchbook. Hearing Barclay Hendricks call his camera My Mechanical Sketchbook was like amazing, a real epiphany for me. And clearly this was going to be the title of our show. I want to thank everyone at the Rose for really, it takes a whole team to put up a show. Thanks to Eliane for partnering with me, and most especially, oh, and thank you everyone for joining us, but thank you, Ari, so much for sharing. I know it's not easy to talk about a friend who's not with us, but thank you for bringing him to life today for us. March 2nd, Eliane and I will do a full virtual tour of the show, and please come to the Rose. It's free always. The show is up, as is Recollections, where you can see Ari's work, as is a new show that we're opening tomorrow, a video show by Raida Adon. We have 3 Frida Kahlo self-portraits on view. The Rose is a happening place. Thank you everyone so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.